Okay, welcome back, and I've been looking forward to this guest. So delighted to have with us today Bruce Gilley. He's a professor of political science and public policy at Portland State University. His work centers on global politics, democracy, comparative development, and colonial history. He is also active in defending academic freedom and political diversity in higher education. He's the author of a fascinating book called The Case for Colonialism, and there's a picture of the cover of his book on the screen. And you can reach him at a website, and that is pdx.edu/GilleyB, G-I-L-L-E-Y-B. Professor, good to see you. Thanks for your time. How are you today?
Great. It's nice to be here.
Why did you take on colonialism?
I took on colonialism because I'm a political scientist, and I spend a lot of time looking around the world at countries that are doing well, that are doing not so well, and that have fallen apart. And one of the things I started to realize is colonialism is closely associated with countries that did better, that survived better, that left in place development, democracy, the rule of law. And that's pretty obvious, actually, from the data. But everyone was telling me in my graduate school and in my profession that colonialism was evil. And at some point, I just couldn't stand the contradiction, and I needed to take this on and ultimately write this book called The Case for Colonialism.
Why is it considered evil?
It's considered evil because at a certain point, we lost an understanding of how history operates, namely that history has always operated through more powerful, more effective, more superior civilizations extending their governance systems over areas that didn't have governance systems or were suffering from tyranny and underdevelopment. That used to be accepted. That was normal. That was certainly the way that most Native Americans saw the world, for example. It's certainly the way most Africans saw the world. But after World War II, as these new countries were being birthed, they decided that colonialism was evil. And that was really not so much about colonialism. It was more of an attack on the West. So the West had been the colonial power, and therefore colonialism was seen as some Western specialty, something that had been invented by the West. It certainly hadn't been. And so it became seen as evil because it was associated with the West, and it was essentially a way to say, we don't like the West, we don't want the West involved in the world, we want to get rid of the West. And that's how it became a word that went from having good connotations to bad connotations.
Just a little bit of a side question. Are you kind of an oddity in your profession?
Yeah, and that's actually quite recent. I mean, as recently as the 1990s, let's say, an academic department in the social sciences, political science might have, say, 1 or 2 conservatives for every 5 liberals. I mean, there was some degree of balance. It wasn't even balance in the 90s, but at least there were a reasonable amount. Today, conservatives are completely extinct in the social sciences. I'm a fluke. After me, there will be none. I'm in a department of 18 people, and I'm the only conservative. And after I'm gone, it'll be a department that's totally full of lefties and liberals.
So let's go to some basics here, Professor. Define colonialism.
Colonialism is when country A extends its system of government over territory B, territory B generally not having a system of government or having a pre-modern system of government that is not up to the task of the modern world.
So is that kind of what the complaint is in the Middle East war right now? Israel is implementing its system over Gaza, or at least over the Hamas and Palestinians?
Well, that's right. I mean, Israel is a successor state to the British colonial mandate in Palestine that the British took over after the Ottoman Empire collapsed in World War I. The British colonial mandate in Palestine created the state of Israel. Israel is a settler colonial state in the sense, and I mean that in a good sense, not in a bad sense. It's a colonial legacy state that was settled by Jews returning to, and in many cases coming for the first time to Israel. And because it's a British colonial settler state, it is well governed, it has the rule of law, it has democracy, it has development, it has human rights, it has accountable government, it has room for dissent. And it's open to new ideas and to self-criticism. That's the great legacy of colonialism. The complaint about Gaza is that the Israelis are trying to protect their settler colonial state and allow the Palestinians to have their own system of government, which the Palestinians are serially unable to do, which keeps drawing the Israelis into these areas, much like a settler colonial state or a colonial state might have done in the past. And, the best thing for Palestine would be for Israel to take over the entire area.
So how do you respond to critics that say colonialism perpetuates oppression?
I say it's incorrect. It's factually incorrect. It's even logically incorrect. Colonialism, the Western colonialism, mainly spread because of what we call pull factors. In other words, the indigenous peoples wanted it. They drew it in. They pulled it in. The British and the French were very reluctant colonialists in Africa and in Asia, but they found a ready welcome wherever they went, usually because people who were facing massive oppression from either tribal rivals or even from their own ruling systems preferred to be ruled by a relatively liberal and accountable system of government, which is what the Europeans offered. In the 19th century, and even up to today, nowhere in the world has ever come close to Western countries in terms of offering liberal and accountable government. Liberatory government that liberated people, that ended oppression. So colonialism was one of the greatest anti-oppression crusades of world history. And it's just factually incorrect to say that people suffered oppression under colonialism. You have to look at what they were suffering from before colonialism, and then you have to look at what happened when some of these countries tried to end the colonial system. That's when the real oppression took place.
Yeah, I want to come to that, but one more question. The result of America, actually, colonialism is in our DNA. They were trying to get free from something, right?
Well, the United States is a classic example of the benefits of colonialism. The United States was created by a British colonial system, as was Canada, as was Australia, the other Anglo settlement countries. If the British had not established their rule here and had been left up to pilgrims, this would have been some form of pilgrim theocracy. It was not a pilgrim theocracy because of the British colonial state that introduced constitutional government, the rule of law, property rights, the market economy, and all the systems of accountability through which the United States grew to be a miracle of good governance in a very unlikely place. Of course, in all colonial systems, there was always some tension as countries got ready for self-government, as they reached education levels, as they started to feel that they could take power. And the United States is no different in having a last-minute squabble. But the American revolutionaries never said they were going to end colonialism in terms of the legacies of the British colonial state. We didn't abolish property rights. We didn't abolish human rights. In fact, the American revolutionaries wanted more colonialism in the sense they wanted extension of rights that even the Englishmen didn't have. This was a very system-preserving shift to self-government in the United States, and that's why the United States is such a success.
So talk about countries that threw off colonialism. What happened?
Well, it depends what we mean by threw off colonialism. If they threw it off in the sense of moving against and faster than the British or the French or the Dutch or the German colonial powers wanted, and in doing so repudiated everything that had been established in the colonial period, education systems, health systems, property rights, accountable government, human rights, independent judiciaries, and then those countries spiraled very quickly. I mean, within, I would say, weeks even. It's astounding when you look at histories of countries like Ghana or Nigeria or even Uganda, Guinea, and you can go through the list of them. Within weeks, months, certainly by a year, these countries faced starvation, tyranny, and mass migration out of them. If the countries, on the other hand, were more prone to accept the colonial legacy and see themselves as carrying on what the British and French had established, and here I would look at a country like Senegal, or a country like Botswana, or a country like Singapore, which everybody knows is a good example, then those countries ended up thriving and being little islands of good governance in the midst of chaos.
Is colonialism, given the argument that we see today and kind of where you are, I mean, you're one among five, how threatened is colonialism, if I can use that term, in America?
You mean like the concept? Like, can we debate it? Is that what you mean?
Well, moreover, its threat to be eliminated.
Well, right. So now we have this, you might have heard of decolonize, right? We need to decolonize the library. We need to decolonize the soccer team. We need to decolonize the education system. We need to decolonize government. We need to decolonize, the Department of the Interior. Our Secretary for the Interior wants to decolonize everything she does. So what does this really mean? Because, wait a second, we're an independent country, so there's no decolonization in terms of the way people normally understand that word. What they really mean is they want that second type of decolonization, not the one that moves you to self-government, but the one that also tears down all the institutions of British and French and Western governance systems. They want to end equality before the law and replace it with group-based entitlements, and different groups and different races have different rights and opportunities. They want to get rid of the market economy. They want to replace that with a more state-planned economy. They want to get rid of speech freedoms and the right to academic and First Amendment rights, because they see that as colonial. And instead, speech and printed and publishing freedoms are going to be doled out based on some idea of different groups' rights to be heard or not heard. This is what decolonization meant in these basket case countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And it's that kind of basket case situation that they want to bring to the United States.
Wow. All right, let me take a quick break here. Let me show to our viewers and listeners. You can check out Professor Gilley's book. It's called The Case for Colonialism. There's a picture of the cover of the book. And where can they get it? Online? Where?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. The publisher is New English Review Press. You can buy it from their website as well, anywhere your fine books are offered, but not for sale at Powell's Bookstore in Portland, the biggest bookstore in Oregon.
We'll talk about why when we come back. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, and honored to have with us today Professor Bruce Gilley. He's a professor of political science and public policy at Portland State University. He's authored a fascinating book called The Case for Colonialism. And there's a picture of his book on the screen. It is available, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, but not at Powell's Bookstore in Portland. Why, Professor?
Well, you may recall Andy No's book on the Antifa movement that Powell's decided not to sell because its supposedly open-minded readers decided some books shouldn't be sold. And so far, My Case for Colonialism book has not showed up on their list either. My previous two books on colonialism are available through Powell's, but only shipped from a remote warehouse. They certainly don't display them in the store. And this new one, The Case for Colonialism, is not even showing up as available via Powell's right now. So I can only assume that Powell's has realized that stocking this book or selling this book might get some of their supposedly open-minded liberal readers in a tiff, and they've decided not to stock it.
To that point, are you concerned about your profession, academia, being intellectually honest to what colonialism is and their push to decolonize?
Yeah, academics lost any credibility on the question of colonialism about 50 years ago. And basically, about 50 years ago, it became difficult. And then I think by the year 2000, impossible to actually engage in scientific study of colonialism, because the only viewpoint allowed in the academy was colonialism is evil, and we need to keep riffing on various versions of why it's evil and how it's evil. The debate essentially disappeared. So that's true of colonialism. That's actually true of a lot of issues in the academy today. There's essentially no intellectual diversity, which is quite an achievement if you think about it, because universities are places where intellectual diversity would be your stock in trade, but it's disappeared. And rebuilding it is going to take a generation or more. Certainly on this question of colonialism, it's frightening how much students are unable to access more than one viewpoint. And I'm glad to have at least provided that they can access outside of classrooms.
How do you connect the dots, or are they being deconnected between colonialism and capitalism?
Well, colonialism introduced markets, marketized economies, for sure, and thank goodness it did, because the marketized economies were the economies that created welfare and well-being for middle-class households, and the beginnings of economic and industrial development, whether it's India, Africa, Southeast Asia. So absolutely, that's one of the greatest contributions of colonialism, was to not only have created market economies where none existed, but also to integrate these countries into the global economic and financial system. One of the big benefits of that was, of course, the ability to borrow, to have access to capital markets, which is hugely important, as you know, for economic development. So yes, colonialism brought capitalism, and thank goodness for that.
I guess where I struggle on this, Professor, is that some large companies that are the result of successful capitalism are turning around and supporting decolonization. Are they fooling around with their own future?
Well, they're simply following where they think public opinion is leading. I don't see them giving up their key assets to collectives owned by the state in order to decolonize their economy. So I think it's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. They're still ultimately accountable to shareholders, and if shareholders feel that their ideological inclinations or their kind of weather vane inclinations are causing a decline in earnings, the shareholders will sell their shares and they'll suffer for it. So I think it's a lot of virtue signaling and a lot of public persona, greenwashing, anti-colonial washing. But thankfully, markets keep these companies accountable for the bottom line.
Do you think the demonization of colonialism succeeds?
Oh, the demonization of colonialism succeeded a long time ago. Indeed, it had become so demonized and so successful that people thought that making a case for colonialism was like making a case for the Holocaust, or making a case for suicide, or making a case for bubonic plague or something. I mean, it's amazing how completely putrefied the human mind had become, because intellectuals and academics and liberal writers and historians had essentially crowded out any possibility for debate, and yet their arguments were as weak as straw. It's so easy to go back through the evidence and the data and conduct a scientific study and show the clear benefits of colonialism for colonized areas. So in a sense, my job has been very easy. It hasn't taken me a lot of intellectual effort to show how false most of these narratives are. But the backlash has been extensively negative, because this is a kind of chestnut. This is a kind of favored idea that people who've built their careers on it feel very insecure when someone challenges them.
Interesting. So what do you want people to take away from your book?
Well, I want people to realize, and in particular in the United States, that it's one thing to talk about self-government and independence, which went very well for the United States because we were peopled by Europeans, in particular by Englishmen and Scotsmen. Got to make a call out to the Scots. And those people brought with them the cultures and the norms and the intellectual and civilizational resources through which independence from Britain could go well, because we would carry on those cultural and civilizational norms, those institutions would be preserved. And so the United States looks like a great example of decolonization, but it didn't go so well elsewhere outside of places that had been settled by European peoples, because those peoples still had major cultural, normative, intellectual transformations to make that weren't ready. And so when we talk today about the need for decolonization and independence in places that are barely a generation removed from pre-modern society, and where the hold of those institutions is very weak, we're essentially consigning these people to tyranny and poverty in the name of what? In the name of feeling good about ourselves. And we need to rethink this idea that, independence for countries that have been nothing but tyranny and starvation for 50 or 60 or 70 years is somehow making people's lives better, is preserving freedom and human rights, because it's not.
Thank you. Thank you. You're fascinating. I'd love to get you back. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out the book. It's called The Case for Colonialism, and look for it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And if you go to Powell's bookstore in Portland, you have to ask for it. Tell them to go into the warehouse and get it. Professor, thanks for your time. Sorry for the noise. It's raining just like crazy here, and it's coming through. But can we get you back?
Great, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.